Welcome to another episode of Open World Chat. I am your host, Jim Dandino. I am joined, as always, by the fastidious John Odom.
Fastidious?
I'll
go with it.
Felt like a word. And we are joined this week by Grant Patterson. Grant is the proprietor of Wednesday Night Fight Club, a fighting game meetup that meets at Champlain College in Burlington. And I think it's on Thursdays?
Right. Thursdays. We host Wednesday Night Fight Club on Thursdays and Saturdays specifically.
Yeah. It's a way to throw people off, you know. You gotta make them work for it. Grant, welcome to the show.
You gotta read that mix up.
Yeah. So Grant, you're a giant fighting game nerd. I am a giant fighting game nerd too. Talk to me about your fighting game life. What was your intro game? How did you get into this? And then we can talk about how you started as a tournament promoter or a fight promoter.
All right. So thousands of years ago, circa 1991, you got into video games just like every other child of the 80s/90s, but I saw one thing in 1991/1992 that threw my entire world on its ear, and that was an arcade machine called Street Fighter 2. I remember going to skating rinks all the time when I was a little kid, and that was the time that suddenly the all-night skate-a-thon lock-ins weren't really about skating for 12 hours straight. It was about like, okay, cool, I might skate for an hour or two and then spend 10 hours and a $20 roll of quarters I saved up stomping fools in Street Fighter 2 all night. And that kind of sent my whole life on this weird journey that it sounds so odd, but that genre has meant so much to me. I've practically played just about every game worth playing in that entire genre ever since. For the past 30 years, I've been running tournaments since probably, mid 2000s. I've been playing in them for around the same amount of time. I remember my first tournament win was Soul Calibur 2 in Tallahassee, Florida, and that was a big deal for me at the time. I think I was 21, 22 at the time, and that felt really good. And I don't know, fighting games have given me a lot. It's not necessarily finding the artful way to say it. It's not really the experience of playing against other people that gets me going. It's the community and camaraderie you build within a community that's based around individualized self-improvement and performance. And it's not, at its most toxic, it can be a real problem, but at its most healthy, I think there's nothing else quite like it, and it's been beneficial to my life in a lot of different ways. It's allowed me to contextualize a lot of real world interactions and problems and think about things in ways that I wouldn't have probably thought about it otherwise. I don't know, it's a special kind of magic.
Yeah. So talk to me a little bit more about what it is about the genre that does it for you. It is about individual self-improvement. Yeah. But there's also something about the games that lends itself to putting that work in, right?
I think for me personally, it's a multi-layered sort of thing, because at the surface level, you're looking at, all these characters doing all these crazy things, and you're like, oh man, I want to be the guy too. So, you want to be the guy doing the combos and throwing magic fireballs from your hands, because, that just looks cool. But once you start to delve into the systems themselves and start to understand the nature of the game being played, especially as it pertains to playing against someone else, I think once you get past the initial hype of the anime style action that's going on in front of you, you start to dig into the systems, you start to dig into what it is you're actually doing, and you begin to realize the impact of individual decisions. Everything is a micro decision. Everything is a plan for the future, so to speak. And you start to get involved in this very quick, real-time exchange of problems and solutions, to where you're trying to solve a problem that's being thrown at you while simultaneously trying to throw it's a special kind of drug, because every single time you break through that plateau and something makes more sense, then suddenly you feel your field of options widening. Suddenly you have all of these decisions and all of these like little ways to either present or solve problems that weren't necessarily obvious or attainable before. And every time that happens, you just exponentially grow in terms of understanding. And there's a physical aspect to it. There's also a mental aspect to it, to where not only can you get better at performing the thing, but you get better at reading and understanding and even predicting the thing. There's the mind, body, heart trifecta that people like to talk about, where it's like, are you a knowledge player where you're playing from frame count? Are you a physical player where you're playing from physical reactions? Or are you a mind player where you're playing from, psychological conditioning and reading people? And there's so much of that happens in all sorts of different kind of alchemic mixture for every individual, that no two people play the character the exact same way. So you'll find like people will have like self-expression where they'll play a certain character a certain way that is completely unorthodox to what you'd be used to. And to me, that's just wild, how you can have an entire community built up around people that are doing the same thing with the same sets of tools, but doing completely different stuff with it. It's like art, everyone can have the same palette, the same paints, the same canvas, but wind up with completely different results. To me, I just think that's amazing.
Well, and everybody can have the same math too, but with the shifts in context. And when we talk about math, right, at its fundamental core, in a fighting game, you've got a health bar, you have the hit stun decay, which is how long somebody stays, how long the defending player stays, so that you can combo, and you have damage scaling, which, a low punch does a certain amount of damage if it's the first hit, and it does different damage if it's the fifth hit in the combo, right? So there are optimized mathematically combos that do the most damage, but those only work if the circumstances are perfect, and you've got to be smart enough to figure out how to apply different movements in different circumstances, right?
To me, I think what's interesting is the fact that there are, from what I can tell, there seems to be kind of like two schools of thought with that, where you have either the rush down type of player who gets in to try to overwhelm someone in order to create the opportunity on which they can capitalize, or you have the patient player that is going to kind of bait you into a falsehood in order to make you expose yourself and then create the opportunity by which I can be capitalized upon.
Right.
I think that's awesome. I think it's crazy how you can actually build out something optimal and have something be like this incredible like 14-hit string that will really, really do some real damage and has been optimized to where you have the least amount of scaling and it's not so wasteful on meter, or it's even meter positive.
Right.
But then at the same time, like I play a lot of Sam Show these days just because I love how basic back to square one that game is. There's also certain ways where it's like, okay, well, we're only going to the way I would say it is basically you would do the least amount of work possible in order to preserve the weight on your mental stack. So you may not be doing like the full 90 damage from like an optimal combo, but you'll settle for 70 because you only had to do 3 actions. You know what I mean? Suddenly that's allowed you to like force the reset, get the damage, and back off and kind of allow yourself the breathing room to recover and plan your next strategy. It might not be so psychologically damaging as like corner carrying someone into the next counter, but you can have that choice, and what works for you versus how you have to set things up. It's so the possibilities are limitless. It's just your imagination and your dedication and training mode is really all there is to it.
Right. So, John, I want to belatedly warn our listeners. This may well be the nerdiest conversation we've ever had on this podcast.
That's a big statement.
It is a big statement, but this feels nerdier to me than when we were talking about the science behind Star Trek last week with the consultant for the show.
There's different flavors of nerdery.
This is deeply nerdy, and I'm so into it because, ever since I joined the Wednesday Night Fight Club Discord, I've been watching a lot more Marvel Capcom 3 on YouTube and missing my fight stick, which broke in the basement that flooded, that doesn't have carpet anymore and isn't really set up for gaming, but that's just me being sad. But it's so cool seeing all the different, and Spencer, the guy from Bionic Commando, being one of the top tier characters that a lot of people are playing. It's so cool watching the different ways that people play Spencer specifically. And it makes me miss my fight stick.
So I got a full disclosure. I'm not a gamer. I'd love to be a gamer, but I'm not a gamer. So I am going to want to talk to you a little more about the culture, because the culture of it fascinates me. I work in municipal government and I love conflict. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here. But you're doing stuff up at Champlain College, which for those who are elsewhere, it's a little college in Vermont up the road. And I understand if you're working with playing with folks at Champlain, you're playing a lot of Overwatch and a lot of Valorant. Is that all they're doing up there?
So they deal a lot in those arena style battle games, character action games, where you deal more in team shooters.
Okay.
And MOBAs and things of that nature. That's usually where esports is kind of focused on.
All right.
Fighting games are very much the neglected stepchild, even though, to be quite honest, it is the eldest. It's the first. Like the real, aside from score competitions and things like Donkey Kong, Pac-Man, all that sort of stuff, where it's like you had your era of like Twin Galaxies, right? Beyond that, fighting games is where everything took an extremely hard turn, because suddenly you're dealing with score not being an issue. It is real 1v1, who's walking out of here winning sort of versus play. Everything like first-person shooters and everything, that all took off after that. The fighting game revolution is really what did that, and to watch that it's still been gaining steam. We've had like periods of drop off and periods of rise, but to still see it gaining steam, but not be as popular or well known as things like Valorant, things like Apex Legends, Fortnite, that it hurts my heart.
Well, so how much of that is down to the death of arcades versus playing online? Because like fighting games rock in person, but until they introduced rollback netcode, fighting games were pretty shit over the internet because of input delay, right?
I think rollback was really the big revolution. Once the Cannon brothers popped the GGPO, I think that was really the revolution we needed.
John looks puzzled. Can you explain rollback to him?
So
I always look puzzled.
Okay.
That's fair.
So when you're playing online, you have two types of netcode that are in use. Your main type that you normally see is delay-based netcode, where it all depends on your connection speed and whether or not there are frames of delay added to the session in order to compensate for both sides and their lag between one another. So, if you have like 160 milliseconds of lag, you might have like a 4-frame delay. If you have 60 milliseconds of lag, you might only have a 1 to 2 frame delay. If you have 300 milliseconds of lag, you're looking at like a 13 frame delay, and everybody wants to hurl themselves off a bridge. So what rollback does is it takes snapshots at very quick intervals, let's say every 4 frames or so. And these games are running at 60 frames a second. And every snapshot that it takes, it's looking at that state information to make sure that there is consensus between both sides. And if there is not a consensus between what's going on in those game states, it rolls back to the previously agreed upon state. So whenever there's not a consensus, it rolls back to the prior consensus. Okay. When that takes place and things are lining up in consensus, the experience is much smoother. So you get a gameplay experience that's very, very close to the feel of local 1v1 play where there is no delay. And as that technology is improved and as you start to see more and more Japanese developers start to put that into their games, the better it makes it for everyone else. Japan doesn't necessarily need rollback netcode nearly as much because their online infrastructure absolutely crushes the rest of the world because they built everything off of fiber optics. It's all super like engineered from the get-go to kind of be future-proofed in that regard. But they also have the luxury, and I don't mean to say luxury, but you know what I mean, a much smaller space to have to wire up and work with. Whereas when you go to something like Europe or the United States, you have this massive amount of sprawl that's still working on copper backbone. So a lot of it, or even like copper, like to a certain point within fiber, when we get into the major hops. So the netcode needs are different from here and there. It's been a long time coming watching the Japanese side finally start to pick up and say, oh, we can actually like make money from a much larger group of people, being America and Europe and everything else, if we start to operate with that netcode, because that will make them playing the rest of the world viable. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of been a huge revolutionary thing, I'd say, over the past probably 3 to 4 years, where we started to see more and more games adopted as a standard. And because it's become financially successful when we do. So that's been a huge change. To go back to answer your question from before, Jim, I don't know if it's the death of arcades that really did it. Because to me, I was from a time where we would constantly be playing fighting games at each other's houses. We would constantly be firing up stuff like Tekken 3. We would constantly be firing up stuff like, Marvel Superheroes versus Street Fighter. Somebody would get a RAM cartridge for a Saturday and we'd be balling out. Somebody would get, a massive payday and buy a Neo Geo and we'd play Mark of the Wolves. But it's from the ease of finding a game on something like PC, where you can like buy it on Steam and then play it online and or play it for free. The amount of, I can just point and click and shoot and I understand how this works without much thought involved, versus fighting games where you have to teach yourself a physical discipline in order to play. Mm-hmm. I think that's been much more of the perceived hill that fighting games have had to fight against. And then the online side of it just being terrible only kind of sealed that deal and kept it to where only the real true believers were getting involved. As you start to see games like Strive sort of simplify things in some regard, which I have my own thoughts and opinions on that stuff, but also have better net playability, we're starting to see this tide shift. I think Street Fighter 6 is going to be a big watershed moment, personally. I think we're going to see the genre explode in a lot of different ways. I think Sony buying Evo was really like the wind beginning to blow. I think we're going to start to see a lot of push towards that, because I think when you look at MOBAs and FPSs, and we already see RTS, things we see as esports channels that are already successful and profitable, some people see fighting games as the place where there's the most amount of lag, but on the flip side of that, there's also the highest potential for gain and growth. So I think they've noticed that and are starting to try to bring that up with Project L coming out soon and being more than likely free to play. I think is going to be a huge out moving forward. But yeah, it's. I can get into the weeds on this sort of shit all day.
Yeah, me too. And we appreciate this. So, but let's get out of the weeds and let's get to the spice. What's your game?
My game, that's a loaded question.
What are your games? How about that?
Yeah, and that's also a loaded question. It's I enjoy a lot. There are no real fighting games that I'll turn my nose up at. I think the only one that I really have, I hesitate to say disdain, but just like a general lack of love for. I don't like Virtua Fighter very much. I think I fight the controls more than I fight my opponent. I also don't really dig the Mortal Kombat series very much because I think it's extremely static feeling. Like I don't like the way the game feels in my hands. I say the same thing about Street Fighter V a lot.
Okay.
When it comes to games I absolutely adore, I can give you my top 5, let's say.
Okay.
My favorite 2D fighting game of all time is Garo, Mark of the Wolves. My favorite 3D fighting game of all time is Soul Calibur 2. My fan favorite fighting game of all time, I think, is probably Project Justice, which is Rival Schools 2.
Okay.
And I think my favorite current fighting game in the modern era is Samurai Showdown 2019. And my favorite game overall to play, if you just ask me, hey, what game would you rather play, is going to be Mobile Suit Gundam Extreme versus Maxi Boost.
So you have a 25-minute video about why that game is so cool. Can you condense that down into 35 seconds?
You can take more than 30 seconds.
Yeah, that's
5 seconds. So it is a game that is so easy to pick up and figure out the basics of, but the labyrinthine ways in which you can use the system mechanics and the tools available to you across a cast of 185/186. It is a rabbit hole comprised of rabbit holes comprised of rabbit holes. It's a multiverse. It is praise Jesus. You need to play that game. It's so good. It's so good. It has dominated Japanese arcades. That series has dominated Japanese arcades for 15 years straight. And that is a dynasty. It's a dynasty we're blind to in the West. And I'm like, every time people oh, it looks cool, but I'm like, no. Once this stuff gets in your blood, it becomes an addiction. It becomes a religion. You have to be very aware of what you're playing with. It's super.
So it's 2 joysticks, right? The arcade machines?
No, it's not 2 joysticks. It's not like Virtual On where you have the 2 joysticks and
okay.
Can't control it. It is literally a stick and buttons. It's your standard arcade stick.
Okay.
So you got 4 buttons and stick. Stick points where you want to go. You double tap the stick in a direction. You dodge, fire, and break the weapon lock. Down, up to block. That's literally your entire motion right there. Your buttons are shoot, melee. There's a boost button. You tap it once or hold it to do vertical maneuvers. Double tap it and you dash in the direction, and you can rotate the stick to fly and curve and alter your heading. And then you have a switch target button because it's 2v2. And then you have a 5th button, which is communications. So you can put different comm statuses on shortcuts up, down, left, and right to tap with the button for both starting, ending, and mid-match, or you can just tap it at neutral to send a colored status update to your partner to let them know how much danger you're in / how much health you have left. It is super easy to just pick up and play. I've taught multiple people how to play that game, and within about 30 minutes, they're like, oh, okay, cool, I get it now. And if you keep playing it, it's like, okay, when are we playing Gundam again? So it's like, yeah, it's wild.
Damn, I'll give you a call.
Yeah, I've been eyeing it on PlayStation Network for a little bit now, and I'm going to grab it. More spice. What was your Marvel Capcom 2 team?
Oh, my MVC2 team? All right.
If you say Cable, I'm throwing you off right now. We're ending.
No, Cable's not on my squad.
Okay.
I am garbage at that game. Like, Anime Fighters to me is like, it asks me to do so much with my mental stack that I don't quite vibe with them, but I love to play them anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So my favorite MVC2 squad is as follows. It is Guile, it is Colossus, and it is Juggernaut.
Damn, beefy.
Yeah. So I usually start off with Juggernaut, pull the glitch to keep the power up for as long as I can, tag him out to keep him on side load, and then I just kind of let I use Colossus to do the upwards dash to kind of stop with anti-air, and then I just basically use Guile as point and just play a zone game and just try to like keep people back or interrupt people where I can. And whenever they do, super heavy commitment or try to jump in on me, either send Colossus out there or send Juggernaut out there with the powered up punch. And then, if I have to bring him back in to, dispense some justice, since the power up's permanent, head crush it out and just like dominate. And it's very stupid. It's a very brain dead team, which is why I get blown up with it a lot, but it's too much fun to deny.
You know what? It's better than playing the low tier garbage that I do. I was, Cyclops, Akuma, and Hayato.
Oh man, you got Hayato. I appreciate your commitment to excellence, sir.
It is not a commitment to excellence. It's just I think he looks cool, and I like it. He has the sword has good reach, and awesome. If I can ever hit, what was it? It was the kick super move where you have to keep tapping to keep the combo going. I've never managed to make it work.
Dude, the fact that Hayato is not blessed by the frame gods, so Vaya con Dios, my man.
Thank you. I appreciate your support. So tell me about the dojo.
All right, so we've been running Wednesday Night Fight Club for about a year. We started off at Vermont Gaming Academy, and then we moved over to Champlain and started a partnership with them. The thing that always, I don't want to say bothered, but it made me kind of sad was the fact that when we run it on Wednesday nights from around, it's usually 5:30 to midnight, that is not conducive to the demographic that can really make the most use of having a self-improvement minded community. And that would be kids, like teenagers. Because I grew up in arcades, and a lot of the kids I grew up with were the smartest ones in the room while also being kind of aimless. Like, we weren't really doing anything. We were just trying to look for something to do, very bored. So I wanted to kind of build a community for kids who are growing up like I did. I see a lot of bored kids around here. I also see a lot of problems finding things to do after school that aren't booked up. Summer camps are the same way. So the demand is there, but the supply is not. So in my mind, I was like, well, how do I serve the demographic that can really make the most use out of this, that would also low-key feed into the pipeline into the greater fighting game community in the Burlington/Chittenden County area? And in my mind, I said, well, why don't I just do this after school? So I have been basically spending the last month and a half building out a space in Essex Junction where we are going to be doing that 5 days a week and having sort of a focused dojo mindset. It's not going to be an after-school program in the sense of, oh, just drop your kid off and they'll play video games. Haha, video games is not even the main focus. I want to give people a discipline, and I want them to have a positive experience to where they learn things about life that you didn't think you would learn from pressing buttons against other people, like how to apply patience, how to handle, setbacks, or how not to treat losses like a personal validator, but more like a lesson that you get to improve from. You break into like teaching math and teaching resource management and teaching, patience under pressure and long-term planning, and possibly even get them to a place where they can get scholarships to places like Champlain and be able to stay in state and go to school and kind of have the two things I've noticed about this place in terms of the state as kind of a new person in town is the fact that Vermont, as great as it is, and I really do love it here, and I love the ethos behind what a lot of Vermont does, it is 10 to 15 years behind the curve in a lot of different ways.
That's our state slogan, actually.
We'll get there eventually.
No, 15 years behind the curve. I think
there's good things to that. Y'all didn't step in the same piles of dog shit that everyone else seemed to. So like that, there is a plus to that.
Mm-hmm.
The dog shit's old and crusty by the time we're
right. It doesn't stick to your shoes. It's already been knocked away by, places like Florida. So it's but then on the other hand, there's also a lot of kids here that are kind of the nerdier persuasion and aren't necessarily going to vibe with playing football or lacrosse or hockey or anything like that. There's also the risk of like injury, and who wants to get CTE for a college scholarship? So I see all of these things and I'm thinking like, what's the best intersection of what I can bring to the table, of what I love, and how can I bring that to kids who will vibe with it the same way I did, but offer it to them in a much more structured way that gives them positive impact in schooling and in their personal lives and their relationships with people, from their parents to their friends to everything in between. How do I help make them better citizens by giving them those green vegetable concepts while also wrapping it in the candy coating of learning how to get good at a fighting game?
I like the metaphors. Metaphors are good.
Yeah.
I haven't have had no idea what the hell y'all are talking about for the last 30 minutes, but I get metaphors. And you opened up the door for me here to get into, Jim's going to know exactly where I'm going. There were a couple buzzwords early on, and you just said another one that are going to, you probably know which ones I'm going to say, Jim. Early on, I heard the words culture. Mm-hmm. I heard the words toxic, and I just heard the word demographics. Okay, mix all those together. You know the kind of things I'm going to ask. Have at it.
I'll go first because I have less of a culture to offend. Grant's deep in it. He might make enemies here. The fighting game culture absolutely has a toxic aspect to it, just like any other nerd culture does. Right? It is exclusionary. It is not inherently exclusionary, but there are corners of it that are exclusionary. There are corners of it that are ridiculously misogynistic. But it, like a lot of what I have seen from the fighting game community, is that it is pretty diverse. It is pretty supportive, and depending on the game, you're going to have a lot of women in there. You're going to have a ton of people of color playing, and it's about the game. It's not about the people necessarily. And I feel like when it becomes more about the people, that's when the toxicity starts to bubble up.
Mm-hmm. What do you think, Grant? Is this something you have to take on head right into full speed ahead, or is it?
It's something that part of my goal with this is to try to change the fighting game community's cultural pH. I there's a lot of good to be said for having a massive amount of diversity. There's a lot of good to be said about having a very egalitarian mindset where like you're judged on the quality of your works, whether it's your performance in tournaments or even, your performance in terms of how well you teach or how well you commentate. You don't have to be the best in anything, but as long as you're honestly engaging in good faith and trying to be the best participant and citizen within that community as you possibly can, I think that's definitely half of the great side about it. But as Jim was saying, there is sort of a darker undercurrent to it. And my personal belief is that a lot of it is tied to the very simplistic mindset that comes from the might makes right mentality. Just because you are the best at pushing buttons does not make you inherently have the right idea. So when people say things like, oh, the FGC is soft now, I think that is a radically simplified pushback against the idea that the FGC is more emotionally mature now and is now actually asking themselves questions of, well, what sort of culture are we leaving? I have long maintained that the fighting game community's problem, by and large, is the fact that it tends to be a group of masochists waiting for their turn to become sadists.
Ooh.
And and that leads to a lot of issues because you really extol the virtues of shouldering pain or delivering it rather than taking the time to say, oh, well, let's think about things and really have a discussion. Like people joke and rip on the fact that there's like discourse. They clown on it all the time. And I really think that the discourse is what really needs to happen. We need to actually be having conversations. We need to be welcoming smart people with smart opinions, and even say, like, if you don't have the right opinion or you don't have something that works, we shouldn't be afraid to say that. We should be ready to adapt. Like, that's what we always say we do, so why not actually follow through? There's a lot of room for that to change, and I think the best way to do that is to start building that culture from the ground up. Trying to change people's minds, I've learned, whether you're talking about sociopolitics or even something as simple as fighting games, trying to change people's mind is less of a Herculean task and more of a Sisyphean task. Like, it's that bad. The boulder is always coming back for you. So the best thing you could probably do is to begin changing. If you're disappointed with the taste of the fruit, don't worry about the tree. Start looking at the soil. You know what I mean? Like, you want to start trying to figure out what's wrong with where it's growing. And write off what's already wrong and let that new growth start to dictate the turn. And that's what I'm going for. I'm really thinking that if I have multiple goals with this, and the greater societal goal for my people, being the FGC, I kind of want to bring a kinder, more communally focused mindset. Because we always, cheer champions, but there's never been a champion that's risen from a vacuum. They don't just pop up out of nowhere. They rise from a collective. And every instance, whether it's coaches, teams, you name it, every single champion and everything had to stand on the shoulders of giants. So I think we really have to put the emphasis and onus back on taking care of the collective instead of really, lionizing individuals. By all means, appreciate individuals and honor those individuals, but really make sure that you put the emphasis on the community and how that grows those individuals. I think that's what we need to get better at. And in my small way, I think this is me trying to either begin that change or try to get other people in the mindset of how they can make that change. Because arguing with someone on Twitter ain't gonna do it.
Yeah. Do you have to spend a lot of time detoxifying, or are you're the folks who are connecting with you, get it, or are you getting them young enough?
So what I've noticed about here is that the group we have here is wonderful, and they trend a bit younger, and that's fine. I'd much rather kind of see them, because I'm 40, and a lot of the average age of people who are coming in are like 20 to 30. And that's good. I like seeing that younger set come in with the same sort of passion, but yet they come at it from a different societal time where things like being gay isn't something that you like have to be worried about, So they have a much more emotionally open and accepting worldview, and I think that is phenomenal. And fostering that moving forward while finding a way to still maintain a competitive atmosphere, but make it healthily so, to build that out even further, I think is the real true goal. The community, internet-wide, let's say, you normally see the visibility of the loudest voices, and usually the loudest, most obnoxious voices in the room tend to have the least to say. So it's
yeah, there you go.
That happening.
There's another slogan. I want that on a t-shirt.
I'm good with this. That's what I do.
Well, Grant, where can folks find you online?
So online, you can find me. The website soon to be up at WNFCdojo.com. We're also about to have Wed Night Fight Club as well. It's going to be up there as well. So at W Night Fight Club on Twitter, at WNFC Dojo on Twitter. There's going to be a bunch of other socials that you'll be able to see on the sign as I hang it up, but it's not going to be this weekend because I am not standing out in minus 30 wind chill to hang up the sign.
Nah.
But yeah, we are going to be located at 46 Pearl Street in Essex Junction. It's going to be a smaller venue, but if things are successful and we are able to get the kind of turnout we need in order to grow and build this out, my goal is to end up taking this and opening up other chapters in other townships. So that way it's more convenient for those kids to get to their local chapter. And then we have playoffs and events that can actually kind of have okay, which townships got the crown? You know what I mean? So we build that out. There's a community, but there's also a competitive spirit that goes along with it. That's my actual goal. And to build bigger tournament events here that can not only give them a place to show off what they've learned. It's it's like a piano recital, except it's a versus match. You know what I mean?
I would watch Battle Piano.
Right. So, but you take that and then also have enough prize pool there to bring in out of state players, so that way you get more of the serious players from around New England. I think that'd be really, really cool. My ultimate goal with that would be to identify top talent in this area and then build a travel team from that gets to go out and play at majors. So that would be the real cool thing, because at that point you'd be able to kind of make a name for yourself as a kid, you're in high school and yet you're able to make a name for yourself as part of the squad and be able to get possible sponsorship deals for yourself, get that college education. You even have Champlain's been talking to us. Christian Conazal, who's the head of esports over there, has been so good to us. He was talking about potentially getting a stream station set up at the dojo and teaching kids how to do webcasting, things like that. So have, we have talks about game design. Do you want to do that as a track? Well, then you can start digging into that. Do you want to understand how the esports business works? You start getting into that. Suddenly you have all of these different opportunities for them that would not have been necessarily obvious. It's giving them a pathway to their future while kind of paving it with something fun they want to do. And that to me is far more important and impactful than anything else, especially if it's kids that don't vibe with normal team sports and things of that nature. Which you'll find also a lot of kids, kids that are, on the autism spectrum, kids that are like ADHD, things like that. Like they normally don't have an easy time finding a place to find their own. And if I can build that place for them to do that, I'll die a happy man, because I'll at least been able to hand the gift that I wish I had to someone else.
Oh, man on a mission, or actually 3 or 4 missions.
Yeah, it sounds like. I am mostly just excited because I've finally found the sport that I'm going to force my children to play.
Come on down.
Yep. All right, Grant, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate you guys.
All right.